Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for patiently waiting in the lobby. My name's James Robbins. I'll be your host this evening. I'm Managing Director of Azaris AI, who are a partner of Explio. And with me, I have Neil Grimes from Welsh Water, Pankaj Kane, Chief Engineer at Admiral Insurance, and Steve. Are you there, Steve? I can't see you on my screen.
I am here.
Steve Wilson. Oh, he's there. Sorry, yeah. Steve Wilson from XBO, who's Head of Assurance. And our topic for this webinar is the new assurance agenda in the age of AI. I've got some Q&A prepared to start the conversation off. If those of you who've joined us would like to ask a question in the chat, please prompt and we will engage with you that way. We've built intros and background to the topic into the Q&A, so you're going to find out about all these folks with me very shortly. So hopefully we'll keep you entertained and informed over the next 30-40 minutes, and also give you a little bit of the time back in the hour at the end. So I'm going to kick things off, and I'm going to ask you, Steve, what do we mean by the new assurance agenda in the age of AI?
Thanks, James. So, yeah, I think for me, there are three key changes or additions to the agenda. The first is moving beyond testing into digital assurance. Previously, we've seen testing as an activity, a crucial activity, but it's a validation of whether something works or not. And even when we've integrated quality engineering into continuous delivery pipelines, it's still a validation of whether your change, check-in, or upgrade is working or not. And where organizations are delivering digital change continuously and at pace in highly integrated and sometimes highly regulated environments, the question has to be more about, can this application that I'm deploying at pace and changing at pace be trusted in a production environment at scale over time? And that's where, for me, the move beyond testing to digital assurance comes in, shifting quality both left and right to provide that holistic end-to-end digital assurance strategy that's focused on quality outcomes and business value. And that's why at Explio, I've refocused testing services into digital assurance and structured the service around three key pillars. The first being quality consulting and advisory, which provides that real strategic oversight and view and helps our clients build their strategy and deploy their strategy and coaches them through the strategy over time. The next is quality engineering, and that's where all of our testing capability sits, whether it's manual testing, exploratory testing, automation, performance engineering, etc. And that's because I want all of our consultants to be looking at what technology they can leverage, even as part of manual testing and exploratory testing, particularly AI. And then the third pillar is next gen quality, and that's our real research and development pillar, looking at the new technologies, the emerging AI capabilities that we can fold into our quality engineering pillar. And it's in the third pillar where I think the next change comes in, leveraging AI for gains in efficiency and effectiveness of digital assurance strategies. So we're now seeing AI move from isolated productivity use cases into more embedded quality assurance capability, focusing on AI first digital assurance, deploying agentic AI platforms to implement continuous testing, agentically pulling new requirements into validation and breaking them down into test scenarios, test scripts, and then pushing those scripts into an automation framework. But that's one end of the maturity scale. The other end is still exploratory and experimentation. But in the middle somewhere, we're also equipping our consultants with AI-based toolkits to take the manual effort out of a lot of their daily tasks and expand the role of the hybrid tester to become the human in control. And then finally, the third shift for me is the emergence of AI assurance as a priority in its own right. AI is advancing at pace at an unprecedented rate. Organizations are deploying AI-based solutions throughout their value chain, looking at where they can gain efficiency from AI, and rightly so. But it's that pace that also creates risk. And with the pace of delivery, organizations have to ask themselves if they are building carefully enough to be trusted and safe. With breaches of the EU AI Act costing up to 35 million euros or 7% of gross global revenue, AI assurance has to be a priority before organizations have a problem on their hands that they can't really explain. So just to summarize, I think ultimately the theme of that connects all three is trust. So trust in digital change, trust in AI-enabled delivery, and trust in the AI solutions that you're actually deploying. So for me, yeah, that's the key change in the agenda.
Bro, thanks, Steve. You set the scene very nicely there. I'm going to go to Pankaj next, and your team's been on quite a journey over the last couple of years in terms of moving through more and more maturity in the use of AI in the software lifecycle. It would be good to hear a little bit about your journey, and also how do you assure and get that trust in the output?
Thanks, James. Afternoon, everybody. My name is Pankaj, as James said, and I am part of the Admiral UK insurance business. Admiral is one of the largest car insurers in UK, and so there might be some customers here, so thank you for your custom. I think, as you said, James, our journey has been for a couple of years now. So if I just plot out the journey, I think it typically started with, like most organizations, so we were looking at code generation, so the initial tools like GitHub Copilot that were available, which was all about in the IDE for an engineer, where snippets of codes were suggested, or it was generating documentation or trying to tell you, what the code was doing. Success for us at that time was adoption, so how many people are using it, and the metric that we were looking for was kind of acceptance rate, so how many of these suggestions that were being put in front of you were getting accepted. So we were on that journey for about 12 months or so. I think October 2025, around that time, we pivoted a bit and we started to adopt the agentic approach. So the tools had just started to come out. And suddenly, for us, there was a bit of a change in the way we were thinking about this. And the biggest light bulb moment for us was when we managed to demonstrate that you can get a Figma design, which is the beginning of our journey, customer-facing journey, a design, and create fully coded and tested micro front ends entirely through agents. And we managed to do that in 45 minutes compared to the 18 or 20 days that we would take in multiple sprints. And that changed my own personal view. So suddenly this was no longer about something that was somebody else was doing, or the software native companies that were doing. This was something that we were able to demonstrate. And so we changed our track a bit, and we adopted a twofold strategy. Okay, so we continued with the bottom-up approach, which was give the tools to all our engineers. We've got around 800 odd engineers, so roll the tools out, create the guardrails, create communities, and focus on adoption, and look at metrics that tells us how many people are using it, whether the token usage, where that is, how people are using it, so on and so forth. But then we also did a top-down approach, which was I take a squad as a unit, and we started to say that the squad, has to work in this agentic fashion for your entire outcomes. Okay, so we instrumented the harness. We've done a bunch of stuff to try and create the prompt libraries, the skills, the various skills that we need, created the enterprise context, and then allowed the squads to operate from generating a story all the way to a pull request through agents. And what that meant was that you elaborate the story, a human looks at it and says, yeah, it meets the definition of ready. And then you get the harness to create the code. to create the test cases, to execute the test cases, to create the pull request, and before it goes to a human for review, it gets reviewed by another LLM for code quality. And then we made sure that we are putting in our standards and context, again, the enterprise context into that code QA process as well. And we've got around 11% of our squads using in this fashion. We've got a very aggressive rollout plans to try and roll this out everywhere. And we have created a central team that we've invested in that's continuing to build the harness and the tools to make sure that we've got the skills needed to get the output that's ready. Your second question, James, was about how do we make sure that the code is doing what it's supposed to do. So I think we'll obviously touch upon that a lot more in this webinar. That's the context. For me, there are kind of two things. One is the human is still accountable for what the code is doing. So I am not in a position where we are saying we're going to be entirely vibe coding. The engineers are on point for making sure that the code is doing what it's supposed to do. But their role changes. So they are no longer executing it, they're observing it, and they're making sure that it's the right questions and the right coverage and the right data gives us confidence that the code that we've generated hits the definition of done for that story purpose. So I'll pause here for a minute, but it kind of gives you a view of the journey that we've been over the last 2 years or so.
Brill, thanks, Pankaj. And just a reminder, people, if you've got questions about anything that any of the speakers are sharing, please feel free to add them into the Q&A. Amazing story, and I've got some more questions to follow up with you, Pankaj, so far. It might feel to some of us like you've blasted off into distance compared to some of our maturity, so I'm sure we're all keen to learn. Much harder though, Neil, in a water and wastewater business, I would imagine. Lots of physical sort of variety and complexity to manage when compared with insurance. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to date?
I'll bring you back down to earth a little bit by running through what we've done. To introduce myself, I'm Neil Grimes. Up until last week, actually, I was working for Welsh Water. I've since taken up a role outside of the sector, actually. So if I get a little bit confused between the we's and they's, you'll have to forgive me a little bit. I'm still learning that in the new role, but I did hold the AI baton for a little while at Welsh Water. And as you say, water is quite an interesting context for AI. You've really got kind of a hybrid organisation. The retail function are usually quite kind of ambitious around technology, keen to adopt new technology. You've got the operational side of the business, which kind of conversely is pretty risk averse for obvious reasons. And in that mix, then you've got kind of legal teams who are particularly worried about new technologies, and you've got parts of the business that really find it difficult to adopt new technologies because things have been proven in the way they do them before. So the ambition for us really as an IT team was to move quickly but safely, to find some real opportunities for the technology. But at the same time, to recognise that as a critical national infrastructure organisation and looking after people's health through water and taking away waste, we needed to be conscious of that. And so where we've settled around assurance is largely still human in the loop, and so that will give a challenge in terms of kind of scaling. That's why kind of what Steve and Pankaj have been talking about in terms of assurance is going to put a little bit of a break on scaling, but at the same time, it hasn't prevented us from moving what I think is quite quickly for the industry. And to give you an example of things that either personally or kind of through extended team we delivered, we were early adopters of the Copilot technology, the early access program, and did some great work about evidencing the real benefits that could bring in sort of percentage terms to the exec. We introduced summarization technology into the contact center, which knocked a minute off of average handling time. So, which was, as a kind of a relatively low effort activity, was really quite transformative. And then the most recent work has been around agentic technology to kind of support operations. So I think we've met the brief of starting quickly but moving safely. And potentially others on this call, I think the opportunity for us is to understand how that new age of assurance can support scaling.
Well, thank you, Neil. I've got a question for the audience. People might want to put in the chat. It'd be good to hear about, from your perspective, what functions in your organizations you think are most likely to be redesigned or changed first, or if you're a bit further on the journey, what you're going to do next. Might be something that we have some discussion about as the webinar progresses. So feel free to share your thoughts. I've seen a question from Guy, which I'm going to come to. Pankaj, some startling numbers there in terms of shipping faster. But you also said it's not just about generating faster, because AI can expose bottlenecks. So from your perspective, can you share what your bottlenecks were and how they shifted, I guess, in terms of when you're moving from managing a squad of humans to a squad of humans and AI? What happened?
Yeah, I think this is a massive lesson learned for all of us, and I've been banging on about thinking end to end. So let me talk to you about what I mean by that. I think most of the focus generally in software engineering is on build process, because that's where it takes a bit of time generally, and the complexities lie. The agents are changing that, and suddenly build is no longer taking as much time as possible. But I talk about, we have improved and we have done lots of work in Gen AI. But when I speak to my stakeholders, it doesn't sometimes pass the sniff test, because they're saying, okay, I'm not actually seeing us ship software faster. You're generating code faster, but you're not shipping software faster. And that is true. And that's because you have to think end to end. The whole flow from idea to value, which is deployments into production and operations. If you don't think about that, all you're doing is making part of the equation faster. And that means the rest of it stays exactly the same. So in my case that I talked to you about, a micro front end example, that we brought it down from 18 days to 45 minutes. What we've done is the build process, we've shrunk it down. But the one before, generating the design, the Figma design, for example, and the requirements associated with it, there's still waste. I think I've got a slide which I've shared with few people, that the bit before is almost 39 days of waste, because we are navel gazing, we are going back and forth, we're doing lots of stuff. The bit in the middle is 45 minutes. And then once the pull request is done, and then with the testing and change management, risk management and everything else, that's another 30 days of potential delay. So you're not benefiting unless you think end to end. And that is probably the biggest challenge for all organizations, is that don't focus on just the build process, think about your entire flow. And the challenge is not building software faster, it's shipping software faster. So Gen AI for me is exposing that bottleneck. That means that you need to think about the waste that exists in other areas, and you will only be successful if you've instrumented your harnesses and tool chains and the enterprise context that allows you to take an idea and get it to deployment entirely through agents. So we are not there yet, but that's my challenge. I've solved the bit in the middle. Now I'm moving left and moving right.
Well, thanks, Pankaj. Could you go back to Neil and say, that was pretty astounding in terms of some of the benefits you've already delivered in terms of that AWS transcription. A minute is quite a lot, I imagine, in the context of the volume of calls and in your contact center, for instance. But was the win about removing friction or headcount? What sort of drove that bit of the project?
Well, to be honest, all water companies have got a challenge in terms of kind of cost and headcount. So that's a given. But to be honest, I think the real focus needs to be around removing the friction and focusing on efficiency. As soon as you start moving into the world of talking about headcount early on, the team lose the psychological safety, and it becomes more about a kind of, at times preserving ways of working that don't really need to stick around. So that project was delivered from the point of view of it being a more efficient way of working and to remove the friction and to improve the service for the customer. The reality is, with contact centres and certain other parts of most businesses, the turnover is quite quick. So if the ambition is to kind of remove the headcount, then that can be done more organically a lot of the time. But I think really firmly believe that by focusing on using the technology to remove the friction and increase efficiency, that's something everybody can buy into to deliver a better customer experience.
Brill, thanks for that. I don't know about everybody else on the call, but I'm using Claude and Copilot and everything quite extensively and being more efficient, but I don't seem to be working any less. And I guess that's the trick, is to kind of remove and bank the friction, as both Neil and Pankaj have described. Steve, I want to ask you from your perspective, just to build on that point, what separates the use cases that genuinely scale from those that just turn out to be pure theatre, as I've just described?
Yeah. So from talking to a number of different clients, and based on Neil's experience there as well, the short answer is business value, right? And the slightly long answer is the difference is whether the use case has been designed around a real business outcome, or whether it's been designed around the technology. I think, as in Neil's case, if you are looking at a business process and looking at reducing friction, making it more efficient, and allowing the existing staff, consultants or whatever, to focus on other areas of value, then I think those are the use cases that scale. And for me, AI use cases that scale tend to have a few things in common. Firstly, that they do solve a meaningful problem. They're not just interesting demonstrations of what AI can do. They're tied to a clear operational challenge or use case. Whether that's increasing operational efficiency, reducing operational risk, or a way to increase revenue. Secondly, they're embedded into the way the organization actually works. So I think a lot of AI initiatives fail to scale because they sit outside of the business process, and then the business process has to change, or this AI solution becomes something completely separate. And if it's a pilot or an experiment, it just proves how something can work, and again makes the technology look nice. But the ones that scale are actually integrated into actual workflows and improve how work gets done, and again allows the workforce to concentrate on higher value tasks. And then finally, I think they have human accountability and assurance designed in. The use cases that scale have robust governance and guardrails and are continuously monitored. And I think use cases that are mostly theatre often look impressive in a demo, but they don't survive contact with the outside world. So, as an example, you could put all of your, Boeing 777 flight operations manual into a chatbot, but are the flight crew going to depend on that when they've lost both engines at, however many thousand feet? Probably not. But it's a good demo and shows what the technology could do.
Brill, thank you. So Pankaj, without metrics, it's just theatre, I guess is the message. How do you measure success with your platform?
Yeah, I think it's, data is super important, because otherwise you're just, it is theatre. That's the statement that I've used a number of times as well. So I've got a software intelligence platform that we've been implementing, we've had in place for the last couple of years. So I have got every engineer plugged into it. We don't use it for performance management. It's mainly to understand our activities and where we're spending time and where are the fractures in the flow of engineering work. So I've got tons of metrics and data available from individuals all the way to the squad constructs, to the various technologies and capabilities, all the way to the top. So as I said, when we the top-down approach that we have for GenAI adoption, where we look at a squad as a unit and we adopt them. So I've got a baseline metrics for that squad. So I know exactly what their cycle times are, how long do they spend time in merging the code, the time to merge, which is one of the indicators, what is the velocity that they are working through. And also there are other indicators of quality like PR iteration time, iterated PRs, what's the backflow rate, so how many of PRs that get sent back because they're not, right, so on and so forth, and failed reviews. So I've got tons of data points. So I've got a baseline, and then we get the squad to adopt in this manner, using the agents, and then we monitor the after. And what I've been able to demonstrate throughout in this process is that when the squads adopt my harnesses and they use the agents to build the software, the cycle time reduces. So I've absolutely got demonstration of cycle time going down. My overall velocity goes up. I can look at the story points and I can see how much work they are putting together. So it's almost, in some instances, it's 2x. Then I can see these things like time to merge, which is one of the areas that we used to waste quite a lot. That's shrinking down. So as soon as the pull request is approved, we can merge the code and we can get on to the next stages of the SDLC. But so this is just about speed. But I also have data that tells me that the the quality is going up. So PR iteration time. So how long does it take for a PR to get approved? And the number of, the backflow rate, as I mentioned, that's reducing as well. So it means that we are generally getting there right first time in most instances. And that also tells me that quality is improving. So I've got data that tells me the before and after. And because of that, I'm quite confident to say the engineering part of my SDLC is getting better. And that allows me to then now to push back to, as I said, the left of the process to my product guys and the other folks, including architecture, to say, right, you still have waste in your processes, guys, because I can show you that I'm getting faster. And similarly on the right, that I've generated all of this, we've got the code, but then it wastes time in the various other stages of the SDLC. So I would strongly advise everybody who's going on this journey is focus on data, make sure that you've got metrics that you can absolutely, buy into, and then create a before and after that allows you to tell a story using data. If not, all you're doing is just using people's statements, and that's pointless.
Well, thanks, Pankaj. Neil, with you, with the story you've shared so far, it's been very much about decision support. But even there, where you're using AI to inform decisions or reduce call handling time, for instance, what are you doing to kind of stop that kind of bot experience with hallucinations or adding the wrong context? How are you ensuring that your decisions are well supported?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all comes down really to picking the use cases carefully, particularly using good and trusted data. The old adage of garbage in, garbage out, I think applies with slightly more kind of flourish in the LLM world, where it can be made to be a little bit more convincing. But ultimately, for us, it did come down to the human in the loop. And were we not to kind of use good data sources and ensure the right use cases are there, then that introduces kind of friction and time into the solution, into the experience, and ultimately affects the customer experience. One idea we did have a look at as well was using a different model to kind of check the answers of the other model. We didn't actually put that into any live solution just yet, but I think that's an interesting one to look at, because the models can often call each other out in terms of errors based on some work we did.
Brill. Thank you very much. I've got a question for the audience. I didn't get any bites on the last one, but I'm going to keep trying. We've talked a little bit about potential blockers having metrics and guardrails. Maybe can anyone share what their biggest blocker to scaling is? Is it trust, governance, or, as the guys have been saying, data, or just skills? Happy to chat to any of your points in that space. Steve, though, speaking of guardrails, often when you think about assurance and guardrails, it feels like we're gonna slow down. How can we kind of overcome blockers or introduce guardrails, but still move as quick as our organizations demand?
Yeah, so I think so guardrails are an incredibly important aspect of both delivery using AI, but also delivery of AI solutions. So from a delivery perspective, I think guardrails are only a blocker when they're either added too late or designed too heavily, or treated solely as a compliance exercise rather than an enabler. If they're implemented well, I think guardrails are what allow organizations to move faster with more confidence in the delivery. We all know that AI, whether using AI in build or delivering AI solutions, introduces risks that are different from traditional software delivery and testing. It produces inconsistent or can produce inconsistent results, or behave differently as the underlying data or prompts or operating model context changes. So if you don't define those boundaries early, then you are at risk with being slowed down because no one is clear on what they're allowed to do. I think lack of guardrails can cause decision paralysis. So, a delivery team doesn't know what they can actually do or achieve, or what their parameters are within delivery. But I think good rock guardrails create clarity and allow the delivery mechanism to move forward with confidence. But I think they have to be applied, appropriately. So an internal AI tool to produce efficiency doesn't necessarily have the same weight of guardrails as a client-facing AI solution that is going to be making decisions around whether a customer can have a specific product or not. And again, your AI chatbot isn't going to be paying the fine for the EU AI Act breach, as an example. But yeah, I think guardrails in delivery are critically important, but as guardrails within the product, the AI solution are again critically important as well. And that's kind of one of the key aspects of AI assurance, not just helping clients understand and implement the guardrails that need to be in place, but also testing them and making sure they fire when they need to, when they get out into the wild.
Brill. Thanks very much. Pankaj, incredible story so far that we've heard in the journey. And there's a great question from the audience from Guy, who's asking, be interested to hear how your developers responded to the change, moving from developer to quality assurer. Was it a positive experience, and what challenges did you have to overcome?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I talk about is that humans are critical. I'm not yet there where in a financial services regulated company, we can wipe code our way to deployments in production. That's not going to happen at all for us for at least some time. It might be a career limiting statement, but I believe I'm standing by that statement for now. So that means this is about our people, and the people continue to make a difference, and they are super important for us. If you take any kind of big change that has come through, you get a typical bell curve type of response. So I've got some engineers who are super excited and they are, leading the charge. In fact, they're running too fast and I have to kind of put some brakes at times with them, but they are, they just want this here and now. There is a bit in the middle who will kind of go along and play and see what's happening, and they will participate, but they are, a bit reserved as well. And then you do get a bunch of people who are genuinely worried because, it does question and challenge, what's my role? Am I going to be, and they're worried about their careers as well. And we've had all of that. Okay, 100%. But I look at it as a massive transformation, organizational transformation, and part of that is you have to bring people on the journey with you. And that means you have to invest time and effort. You have to address their concerns. I've been very, very clear that I don't see humans disappearing completely at all. At all. Our role changes. And I think that's what Guy is asking as well, is how did people respond to that change of role? I think engineers still like to cut code. Okay, that is what that gives them super excitement. And if you take that away from them, generally they get a bit bored. Reviewing PRs is dull activity and nobody enjoys that. I get that. But what we are trying to get them to do is to code or instrument the tools that do the work. Okay, so it's not as if that they are missing the coding completely. They are changing, but they're playing with the agents and generating those and focusing on those rather than building, cutting the code themselves. I also talk about the fact that very rarely any engineer of note will start from scratch today. Mostly they'll copy paste code snippets from somewhere anyway. That's how the reality works. So it's not as if this is this is very, very different thing for a lot of people. But the accountabilities are super clear. You cannot delegate your accountability for what the code is doing. That is still an engineer's job. We have been very, very crystal clear about it. And we generate a lot of excitement and positivity when we see that we are getting faster, better, cheaper, safer in our outcomes. And people want to be part of that success. And therefore, we are bringing people on the journey like that. I haven't had major issues with somebody saying, I'm not going to do this kind of work, because I think people want to be part of it. But yeah, Guy, it's fair to say that it's a typical bell curve. I've had to invest a lot of time in some people, but there have been some who are just pushing the boundary quite a lot for me anyway.
Well, thank you very much. Neil, having worked in the water sector myself, I know that is littered with technology skeptics. How have you, or did you, bring people with you at Welsh Water?
Yeah, funny enough, there's lots of similar themes to kind of what Pankaj was describing. I think the common factor is they're humans, aren't they? So as you say, risk-averse organisations, lots of bits of the organisation worry. I had that in common with them because when people are talking about kind of some of the risks around AI, I was worried too. At the same time, I thought the technology could really do interesting things for the organisation. But in going in and kind of really having that sympathy for what those various parts of the organisation needed to achieve, you can kind of help to work with them to understand. And your blockers are also your protectors, and so it's finding that middle ground. Organizations like a water company, I'm sure many of your organizations have a lot of the processes in place to protect already against some of the kind of the worry around AI, around GDPR and things. There's lots of kind of robust processes there, particularly when there's a human still in the loop. So it's finding the common ground and working to kind of appreciate what level of protection we needed to have in order to protect the organization. At the end of the day, me too. And kind of we came out with a good result that actually meant we could move quite quickly towards using the technology. The biggest challenge we had very early on was in the vendors at times not really being very clear with us about how their technology worked. That was something I'm sure the engineers in the back room knew, but getting that out the front of the organisation was a bit challenging. But with a bit of pressure on the vendors, that came, and we were able to move forward.
Well, thanks very much, Steve. So I think very much accountability, sticking with the leader, or how do we ensure that it stays with the people in what we're doing?
Yeah. And I think this goes back to Pankaj's point around providing clarity around roles and responsibilities of the delivery team. And it's important to make your delivery team know that AI is not accountable for the end product. It can never be accountable. A person has to be accountable. So if we're looking at AI generated code, production of a product, and delivering that into production, and I was speaking to a client on this a couple of weeks ago, and my question to them was, so your delivery team have used an agentic solution to deliver the product. who's the first human that's going to be called when this goes wrong in production? And if you don't have an answer for that, then that is your key problem. Luckily, they did have an answer for that. And I think that is one of the key things around making sure that this sticks culturally, this accountability of the human. And I really dislike the phrase human in the loop. For me, I always say human in control, because human in the loop makes it sound like an FYI, that it's just a side note. A human in control has to be the way. So, the AI solution can generate the code, it create the product, it can push it into testing, agentically test it, can get it to a release position with automated quality gates, and put it into production. But if there is not a human in control, looking at the evidence that's been captured along the way, looking at the quality checkpoints, then you have a major problem. And I'll go back to the point I made earlier, that your customer-facing AI chatbot isn't going to pay the €35 million fine for a breach of the EU AI Act. So that is really the way, through education, clarity, revisiting the roles and responsibilities continuously, that you have to make it stick culturally.
Brill. Okay, so last round of questions. So we've covered the opening question about how we've started the journey. We've talked about generating code versus shipping value, metrics, guardrails, and trust, and bringing people with you. I've called the last section scaling without losing the plot. Pankaj, context and systems thinking beat model choice, but when do you stop chasing the next thing and build?
Yeah, so there are two parts to this question. Let's start with the first one. So another controversial statement from me, but I really, pretty early on, we decided that model is not the most important part of what we are trying to do. And I know we generally chase the model because that's super exciting, every new model and new version and how much it can do and so on and so forth. But what was very clear to me and my, in Admiral for us was, you have to build the enterprise context. You have to invest in building the skills, and that means you need to focus on a overall, a harness construct, some kind of concept of gateways to protect, the guardrails that Steve was talking about, making sure you've got data loss prevention, so on and so forth. All of those are embedded in, and it's the skills and it's the curated prompts are the two things that we spent a lot of time and effort, working through. And because we've got a bunch of technologies, some of them are packaged software, some of them, are legacy software. Oh, have we lost James? He might join back. So therefore, model was not the biggest thing for me. Secondly, I also believe that these models will keep getting better and better, and one would be outdoing another. So you need to create an abstraction whereby you can change the model without impacting the rest of your ecosystem that you're building. And that's how it's playing out. So today we use Claude quite a lot, but we use GPTs as well quite easily, and we've got Gemini in the mix as well. And we can absolutely interchange the model without impacting the rest of my instrumentation that I've done. So that's, that I'm absolutely keen on continuing on that journey. Part two of the question was, when do you stop chasing the next thing? I think it is overwhelming. The rate at which things are changing externally is extremely, it's crazy. And it also feels like if you don't respond to it, maybe you're losing out. So the way I'm trying to solve for that is as I said, we've invested in a central team. That central team's job is to keep an eye on what's coming and instrument that for the rest of our population to use. But the squads and the engineers, they work from what the central team has instrumented. So we try and avoid people going down, cul-de-sacs and making local choices on their own. We've got a bunch of guardrails as we've touched upon. So a team that focuses outside in, brings them in, makes it ready, and we are comfortable that we can use it. But the rest of the population, they are focused on using those to actual delivery of functionality. That's how we have split that out, James. Sorry, we know we lost you for a bit. I don't know if You got
Yeah, this Bob dropped out. I'm back. Thank you for carrying on and
Cheers.
remembering the questions. Maybe just need an AI avatar and then I'm replaced fully then. Brilliant, thank you. And Neil, my next question is to you in terms of funding mechanisms. How are you kind of encouraging entrepreneurship and getting people off the pot to kind of experiment with AI, and how are you helping that funding model to scale?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'll talk specifically about Copilot because there's the option with Copilot, you kind of build it and they will come, kind of put it out there, which Microsoft from a licensing perspective are obviously very keen to kind of encourage. We chose, given kind of cost pressures in the organisation, we chose that the directors would fund put licenses for individuals in their team, and in honesty, I think that was a really good approach. Effectively, Copilot license became a bit of a power user badge. They're not a standard entitlement. There was kind of a badge of honor that went with them. They were a measured cohort. So if you had your Copilot license, you weren't using your Copilot license, and your Copilot license disappeared. And what it had was, maybe kind of created an air of desirability about it and ensured that the people who did have them were really driving things forward. And at the same time, then, when people were seen to be driving things forward, other people wanted them too. And as long as the evidence could be demonstrated, then the investment was there. So I think that model for Copilot drove a focus on value. Finding real value in the technology. And so I think it worked well for that particular technology. I know in other cases that may not be the case, but I think it was an interesting experiment. And I think we picked the right avenue.
Well, thank you for sharing. It's just thought my last question for the audience. Can you be honest? How much of your AI spend right now is buying real value, and how much, to sort of borrow the phrase someone used earlier, is just theatre? And I think as a former CIO, there's an element of you want to throw out some flares to get people excited and while you're figuring out what the program looks like. So I get that there's a role for that, but what is the percentage? What's the shift? I've got one final question for Steve before we start to think about wrapping up, but there is a question from the audience for everyone on the panel, saying we've had a lot of discussion on the importance and usefulness of guide rails. Well, they've asked for a top 10, but I think we haven't got time for a top 10 each, but maybe if there was the top 1 or 2 guardrails from each of you, that would be good. I don't know if I can put you on the spot first, Steves.
Yeah, absolutely. The top 1 for me is probably no surprise, and it's the human control. The human factor is, I see it, the most important, to make sure that there is a human overseeing every element of what an agentic solution is doing, whether it's delivering code or testing code. But that is also overseeing things like the data controls, which are another important guardrail. So if you're using an agentic or a generative AI platform that is using an LLM as well as your own data as its foundation, you have the appropriate levels of control in place to ensure that the data that's being used is right, is appropriate, is controlled in a way that it's not going to escape to anywhere else. And you're not going to get any data that's included in that, say, database that's unexpected.
Well, Neil?
Slightly nicking some of what Steve has just said, but I'd say good data or good process. So, I think AI can help you to kind of improve your process, but if you're looking to kind of, get decision support around the process, then I think the process needs to be pretty robust and well digitized in the first instance. So that would be one of mine. And then think really carefully about the use cases, get some good principles around which use cases you're going to take forward.
Thank you. Pankaj?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'll pull out is enterprise context. So be very, very clear. How do you build that knowledge? Because without that, the solutions may not be fit for purpose. And then so the good engineering and security practices are still valid. Making sure that you've got policy enforcement, DLPs, retrieving any assets from your, Artifactory or registry that you've got. We have built an Azure, we built a Admiral developer portal. So it's a single one-stop shop for all engineers to retrieve whatever assets they need. And so everything is controlled. So these are I just look at it as good engineering practices that you need to have in place. It's just augmented for AI or agents.
Brill. Thank you guys. And last question to Steve. We started the event by asking what do we mean by the new assurance agenda. Hopefully our audience have understood a little bit more about that as we've been through the session today. But what should we be thinking about next? So leaders in the room, taking away from today, what should the next 90 days look like?
So I think that there are probably three key practical actions that any leaders that have joined us today can take over the next 90 days. First one is get visibility through your teams of where AI is being used already. Some of that might be internal use for efficiency gains. Some of that might be AI solutions that have made it into production as part of your products. Where they are AI solutions that have made it into production as part of your products, ask if there was a human tester, and then ask that human tester if they had a written, clear definition of what good enough looked like. And if they don't have one, use your team to create one for anything that is AI based that is going to be heading into production from now on. I think the second one is where you are looking at AI use cases, prioritize the use cases that matter. Not every idea that's AI based deserves airtime or investment. But I think you need to look at where those use cases are going to be most important to your organization. They should also assess which use cases carry the greatest regulatory, ethical, or reputational risk and get the right level of assurance and guardrails in place around the use cases. And then thirdly, and this is kind of an overarching point, is make sure you put the right level of assurance and governance, the foundations for that in place. It doesn't mean creating a heavy framework that slows everything down. It means defining practical guardrails, who owns each AI use case, how that risk is classified, and again, if something goes wrong, who's the first human that's going to be contacted. For any existing AI solutions, I would recommend doing an initial compliance scan and risk scan, particularly against the EU AI Act. That the highest risk elements of the EU AI Act have been deferred until next year, but it is still in place. It is still being enforced. So it's a good idea to understand any exposure and any remediation priorities that you've got around that. And then again, for new initiatives, building in the right assurance into the project from the start, rather than trying to retrofit trust later on.
Brill, thank you very much. And everyone on the call has your details if they wanted to follow up with you. Direct Steve, of course, on any of that. We're just on time, so it means we haven't had time for your AI joke, Steve.
I'm sure there is still time.
We'll perhaps finish on that. What I want to do is I want to thank everybody who's joined us today on the webinar. There is a recording, if you haven't managed to stay to the end, that we'll make available, and we will follow up with an event summary for each of you. Really appreciate it's a crowded agenda, and been delighted to share 45-50 minutes with you today. I want to thank Neil and Pankaj. Really appreciate your contributions. What two great stories there. and appreciate you're also very busy in your role. So greatly appreciated you joining us. That's it from me. I'm going to finish by handing over to Steve to wrap up with the AI joke of the day.
Here's hoping that I remember it. So here we go. Robot walks into a bar, goes up to the barman and asks for a drink. Barman says to the robot, "We don't serve robots." Robot turns back to the barman and says, "I didn't ask for a robot."
I think that's
I thought that was hilarious when I first heard it.
I think it's really good, and I think for some people, and even for me, particularly those who are a bit slow, it took a little while to sink, but I absolutely love that one, and it's a great, really apt for the agenda today, and a great way to finish. Thanks very much, everybody. Hope to see you again soon.